And then you learn things like problem solving skills because during that decade, I survived a military coup. I was in Luxor when the massacre happened. I was in Sri Lanka when a bombing happened. On the last flight leaving Goa in India one year, we had a 3-day flight delay. So you had to deal with an awful lot of angry tourists throwing bottles of pop at you because they couldn't go home. And you have to think on your feet. You have to deal with problems. You have to communicate them.
If you have ever looked around at your life and thought, this can't be it, you are in the right place. This is Flying Upstream, the podcast for people who refuse to live on autopilot. I'm your host, Kristin Medeiros. Each week, I sit down with people who questioned the rules, challenged the expectations, and chose a different path. Not because it was easy, but because it was honest. We talk about the moments that broke them open, the decisions that scared them, and the lives they built when they stopped doing what they were told and started listening to themselves. If you are done following the crowd and ready to trust your own way forward, stay with me. Let's fly upstream. Welcome back, free spirits. It's Kristin here. Today I have someone who has lived many versions of himself and refused to stay inside the lines that society drew for him. Ceri Stone built the perfect life on paper, walked away from it, lived overseas for a decade, discovered endurance sports, completed 6 Ironman races, and ultimately fulfilled a lifelong dream of cycling the Tour de France. He is the author of Le Loop and is proof that instinct can carry you farther than any traditional path ever will. Ceri, welcome to Flying Upstream.
Thank you very much, Kristin. I want to be modest. It's only 5 Ironman, not
Oh
6.
my goodness. Only
Oh,
5.
I'm a bit anal retentive. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you've said that you always knew who you were inside, even when your life looked very traditional from the outside. What was that original desire in you that just refused to quiet down?
I don't know if I always knew, but I very quickly knew once I'd left college and gone into the work environment. When I'd gone to college and I was doing higher diploma in business studies, I think I was destined to do that, and that was destined to lead me certain places. But once I had sort of 4 or 5 years on the traditional path, and I was doing very, very well, I had a career in insurance. I was engaged to a beautiful girl, played football for the company team, which was semi-professional, and I was scoring goals for fun. And on paper, everything seemed great. But within about 3 or 4 months of that career, I knew I was unhappy because I was getting to work. I'm one of these people, I work hard. If we start at 9 o'clock, I get there at 8 o'clock. It's just the way I have. I try and have habits in whatever I do, social, professional, or whatever. But I was looking at the clock on the wall at 10 o'clock every morning, and I was trying to wind the clock forward, and I was playing tricks all day, every day to try and make the day go quicker. So I wasn't fulfilled, but I had very fulfilling aspects in my life. But overall, I wasn't fulfilled. In the UK, we're kind of taught when you go to school, you either learn a trade like plumbing or electrician, or you go and do a degree, and then you go and work in an office. And 19 odd percent of the population follow that. So I was doing what I was told to do. And I was given some poor advice as well. It was like a career conversation at the end of my final year at college. And they said, what are you looking to do? And I said, well, I wouldn't mind traveling for a couple of years, see a bit of the world before coming back and get a career. But for the college, I understand why they do this. For their records, it looks better if everybody leaves and gets a job within 3 months on a good salary. So
Mhm.
I was advised to get work because if I travel for 2 years, I'd be seen as somebody who wouldn't be professional and they couldn't count on which employers will look at. And I was trapped in that for 4 or 5 years. And it just grew and grew and grew. Kind of festered. I was very although having on paper everything was right, I was very frustrated. And there was one singular moment that changed it all, where I went out for dinner with a colleague, and she brought her brother out, and he was working in the travel industry as a holiday rep, working in Greece. And I didn't even know that job existed. I'd been looking for ways to maybe get a career overseas, and I didn't have any skill set. And it turned out the perfect job was waiting for me. But I'm a bit of a fatalist because I believe the universe brought that to me at the right time. I think if I'd have done that job 2 or 3 years earlier, I wouldn't have been mature enough to do the job, and I wouldn't have succeeded. But that one conversation changed my life. 3 weeks later, I was in the Greek island of Rhodes.
That's
I'd
incredible.
handed my notes in, I've been on a training course, and it was such an easy decision to make because my
So
instincts, every core of my being said, you've got to do this.
I love that you're really looking inward because so often it's really hard for people to reconcile what
Mm,
society tells us to do, which is the external
yeah.
pressure versus our internal values. So I think it's so significant that you had that awareness to just only follow the inside there. Okay, so you spent a couple years in
Yeah.
Greece, right?
With that, Kristen, actually, I've got a couple of points on that. Because one, I listened to one of your podcasts, and it was like the spiritual shake-up with Becky Cohen, and she talked about human design. So I went and had a look in on that. And one of the things that the human design says is I actually make most of my decisions based on instinct. I need all the facts, but my core instincts are always right. And I never make a poor decision. And I think I was quite aware of that at a young age. You know, I'd make a list, what's right, what's wrong, and you weigh up the pros and cons. But my instinct would always tell me at the end of the day, rather than I might score 54 points on one and 42 on the other, but my core instinct would tell me. But there is another side to this because people generally don't tap into this because of the nature of work that I've had to do over the years, and also things like when you're cycling the Tour de France and you're riding with somebody for 8 hours, side by side on the bike. I want to get to know people, and I ask people 3 questions, and it's amazing how people can't answer these questions because they can't look within themselves. These 3 questions are: one, are you happy? I'd say 50% of people say they're happy, but they're only saying it because they believe they should be saying it. Do I ask people, do you like yourself? And I'm amazed at the amount of people who don't like themselves. And the other one is, if I say to people, if money was no object, but you had to work, what would you do for a living? And the amount of people say, oh, I'd like to be doing what I'm doing now, but maybe at a senior level. And I'm, but what are you passionate about? And they might be working, say, as an insurance agent, but they're passionate about maybe knitting or skiing or artwork or something. And they're not exploring their passions over decades of speaking to people. I'd say 70% of the population aren't answering those questions correct, and they don't know how to answer those questions correctly. I've been quite fortunate. I've always been able to do that. So yeah, I listen more often than not to my inner voice, and that gave me the best life. 10 years overseas, and I experienced things that most people wouldn't even dream they'd think I'm talking about a movie. So I've been very, very fortunate as well.
So why do you think most people answer those 3 questions in sort of the unsatisfactory way? Where they're not
Yeah,
pursuing their dreams, they're not happy, they don't really love themselves.
yeah.
What's keeping them back?
I think it just goes back to how we're conditioned. I think school tells you to behave this way. In the UK, schools are run by the state. The state people want to go into a job where they're earning and they're paying taxes. I'm not into this sort of big conspiracy theories, but it's the way we're conditioned. Nobody has ever thought outside of those limitations. And then when I was at college, that was what we were told. Then, like when you're in work environment, I've had people say, oh no, you're just a salesman. You can't lead a team. You're just a salesman. And people put you and they pigeonhole you in position because it suits them, because they don't want to be challenged. And the majority of it is how people are conditioned. And an awful lot of people need the security of it. Not everybody. You still need plumbers, you still need electricians, shopkeepers. And a lot of people are very happy doing that. And I'm not decrying any of these careers because a lot of people are very passionate about what they do. But we're also conditioned to kind of live that life. And we're not conditioned to think for ourselves.
So when you were in Greece, what do you think you learned that no office job could teach you, that following the traditional path society tells you to could never teach you?
That's a very good question because, again, that came up on the human design thing. Is whereas I'm a generator, it came up. So I generate life force and energy for people, and I tend to be a natural sort of communicator and salesman and leader. So people do tend to follow. But one of the things it says on that is that you have skill sets, but they're never written down because they're not academic skill sets. And I think all of the skills I learned are not things you could ever do on a training course. And so if I was to go for a job interview at a corporate environment, I can't say I've got these things, but I learned a lot. I learned how to communicate with people. Um, I learned to speak conversational Greek, Spanish, and French. I can tell a rude joke in Swedish. I learned to communicate with people.
Wow.
And I learned essentially communicating with guys who were the owner of a £600 million hotel chain. I can sit down and have a beer with them and talk to them on a level, but I can also sit down and have a beer and talk to the bellhop and the porter on a level. And more often than not, I've fixed problems in the hotel with a bellhop and a porter. I had to learn to communicate because as a holiday rep, we were looking after tourists. So I had to learn to communicate with people from all walks of life, all over the UK, say completely different walks of life, extremely wealthy down to poverty-stricken people, people with no manners to people who are incredibly polite. And you have to learn to flick from one to the other really quickly. I also had to learn very quickly how to be organized and be meticulous with my work. And I had to learn resilience because things will go wrong. And in the travel industry, things do go wrong. And in the 90s, where health and safety wasn't the same as it is now, advertising standards weren't the same as they are now. I had developed a huge amount of resilience and a huge amount of patience. And then I had to learn time management because, say, my first 2 years, I was probably working 80 to 90 hours a week. And you get one day off and maybe one afternoon off. So I couldn't just go and lie in bed on that day off when I'm in Greece. So I had to learn time management and seize every single moment and opportunity I had. And again, it was good people around me who taught me that. I used to go out on my night off, go out and drink till 4 o'clock in the morning, chasing pretty Swedish girls. And my best mate used to come and wake me up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I've got 4 hours sleep and a hangover. And we've hired mopeds or a car, and we were going off to see a different part of the island, experience another adventure, and learn and develop. So there was an awful lot there. And then you learn things like problem solving skills, because during that decade, I survived a military coup. I was in Luxor when the massacre happened. I was in Sri Lanka when a bombing happened. On the last flight leaving Goa in India one year, we had a 3-day flight delay. So you had to deal with an awful lot of angry tourists throwing bottles of pop at you because they couldn't go home. And you have to think on your feet. You have to deal with problems. You have to communicate. And that stood me in so much. Again, it's this generator thing. If you're a generator, you've got to do what you're passionate about. I was doing what I was passionate about. I followed my passions and my dreams, and it really delivered for me.
Well, I think what's standing out to me is that you did kind of reset your life a couple times to make sure that what you do on the outside is reflecting what you're really passionate about and your values on the inside, right? Because you worked as insurance and education supplies
Yeah.
and, we would maybe call this kind of a traditional corporate type job,
Yeah.
sort of a 9 to 5 kind of thing. And you kept finding yourself that, hey, I'm feeling pressure to be in this because I need
Yeah.
to make money and do what my family expects of me or
Yeah.
society. But then you kept on feeling trapped. And so I really applaud you that you kept resetting yourself to get on the right path. And I want to dig in a little bit into one of your life shifts in 2013 when you started doing marathons and then
Yeah.
Ironman races. What did the physical challenge of those events unlock in you that regular life had not unlocked already?
I can tell you one thing above all, and it's particularly when I go running, mental health. I go for a run and you just clear everything out of your head. And I'd solve work problems, I'd solve relationship problems, friendship problems, money problems. I'd solve them all on a run. And the answers would more often than not be really obvious. But when you're sat at a desk and you're managing a team of people and everything's coming in at you, sometimes you miss the blindingly obvious. So for me, I've always had a love of sports, travel and adventure. And so I did the London Marathon in 2011. Then that led to going and doing Copenhagen Marathon, Stockholm Marathon. I just had to take a pair of shorts and a pair of trainers. I could run anywhere in the world. And at that time, I'd fallen back into the career because I had to buy the house, societal pressure. And plus, also, I think if I'd have done an 11th season overseas, I might have been an alcoholic because it was way too social life. And that career that I was back in with education supplies, I was able to get passionate about that because we were affecting children's lives. Children were learning to read and write, do their timetables because of the work that me and my teams were doing. So I could get very passionate about that, but I was also a little bit trapped. But by being able to do sort of sport, that was my savior. That kept me sane and it kept me incredibly happy. And I met more people. And again, people like when I've cycled the route of the Tour de France, these people are just incredible and they're so inspiring that I've ridden with. And they're great friends. And if I hadn't have got off my ass one day, pardon my French, and gone out for a jog, I wouldn't have had any of that. The interesting thing that got me into that, though, because I do write about this in my book, the reason I got into it was I had an attack of gout. I'd stopped playing football at about the age of 37, 38. And I had 2-3 years where I was just idle, working, and then I was eating and drinking too much, put a bit of weight on. And I had a massive gout attack, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It was horrendous. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you can either be on medication for the rest of your life, or you can sort yourself out. You can exercise and improve your diet. So I Googled it, changed my diet overnight, cut right back on the alcohol, and went for a run. That one little thing changed everything.
For those who are not familiar with the Tour de France, to say it's such an accomplishment is an understatement. Tell us a little bit about just the race itself so our listeners can understand how incredible it is.
What I did is an event called The Loop, and the book's called The Loop, How to Cycle the Tour de France. We're a charitable event, so it's not the Tour de France race. I'm not quick enough and too old for it, but we do it exactly 1 week before the professionals do it. We do it on the same route. And it basically means over 23 days, you ride for 21 days, 3,500 kilometers on average. So on average, about 120 miles a day. And over that whole time, you climb about 57,000 meters going uphill, which is equivalent to cycling up Mount Everest 8 times. For us as amateurs, the professionals might do a stage in 4 to 5 hours. We do it in about 8 to 9 hours. I mean, it's huge. It's an awful lot of training, but it's just, you meet the most incredible people. And then you see parts of France that you would never see in a guidebook. and you meet
Well,
people you would never come across in a tourist resort.
I mean,
You eat,
the whole thing. I know you're
yeah,
kind of downplaying, saying, "Oh, it's not the real Tour de France," but like it is.
yeah.
You're doing the exact
Well,
same thing, just in a different way, and it's a monumental physical and emotional
yeah.
journey. So, what do the long hours alone with your thoughts reveal about the way that you approach life? Any deep inspirational thoughts come to you?
I mean, I'm lucky. I'm quite an interesting person, so I don't mind my own my own mind. Um, and look, when you're out on the tour, you're riding with other people most of the time because if you ride with people, if you're sitting in behind somebody, it's 30% less effort. So you all work together. It makes it that little bit easier. But with the training, that would be 15 to 20 hours a week um, of training, and a lot of it on my own. And it could be getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting on the exercise bike in my shed and doing 90 minutes, or with jumpers on, sweating away. A lot of it, I would be focusing on like the numbers that I've got to do or keeping my heart rate down at a certain level. And there's a lot of concentration on the technical aspects of it. But when I'm out on the road, so say if we're doing a long ride on a Saturday and I've got to do a 6 hour ride, for me, it's the joy of being in the fresh air. It's the joy of being out in nature. Then the joy of meeting other cyclists. I look forward to it because it's a savior for mental health. It keeps my mind clear and fresh. But I have to focus on how I'm going to finish this whole thing. So you've got to develop success strategies. And again, that comes back to me being quite fascinated in people, and I love seeing people succeed. I'm also intrigued as to what makes people tick. What makes somebody think I'm going to get up, do an Ironman, or climb Mount Everest, or paint Sistine Chapel? What makes people think they're going to do that? And actually, one of the reasons why I went further forward with Ironman, because I thought if I've got to see what makes people tick, I've got to see what I can do and see where my limits are. And again, I write about this a lot in the book. I'm a really average guy. I'm not physically strong. I'm not quick. My capabilities are very average, but I've got a good mindset. I've had to develop that mindset. So you have to develop things like resilience. You have to develop organizational skills, be able to get up in the morning or finish a day's work and you're exhausted and think, right, I'm going to go out on the bike for 2 hours now. When the easy thing is to go and have a curry, a beer, and watch a bit of rubbish TV. I believe in having great habits in whatever you do. Like you wake up in the morning, you make your bed. You have breakfast, wash up straight away after. Just simple little things throughout the day allow you to do the bigger thing. Because my book, it's called How to Cycle the Tour de France, and it's two parts. It's one, it's a sporting adventure. It's the story of my journey getting to cycling the Tour de France, doing it. The other part is it's like a success manual, and I deal with elements of motivation on how I developed my motivation, on how I got, I've applied that in work, and I've applied that in sporting sort of feats. And there's one thing that I developed on my own. I call it INIOP, and it's ignore negative influences of other people. Because when I told people I was doing Ironman for the first time, I was told, "Oh, you won't do that. You will literally die." Because I wasn't that athletic. That's people's reaction. And if you listen to people, you won't do anything. With the book, I lay out what I think is a formula for success, and then I put it all into practice by doing this monumental feats. And then by strange quirk of fate, I've done it 3.5 times now.
It's incredible. Carrie, you have such an incredible story. And I know you say you're just a regular person, but being able to match who you are with the actions you do every day truly is inspirational. And I have one last question for you. When you look at the arc of your entire life, what is the moment where you felt the most deeply alive and the most certain that you were living the life you were born for?
I've had more than one occasion. I'd say almost the entire 10 years I was working overseas. Because I made that choice to live for 10 years overseas, I was rewarded almost every day. And I'd wake up thinking, God, I get to do this. The amount of people say, "No, I wish I could cycle the Tour de France." Well, do it. So I've taken chances like you and Louisa have by setting up Flying Upstream. I bet you the normal conventional wisdom was don't do that. But I bet you're more alive now than you were a couple of years ago.
Absolutely spot on.
So it's
Yeah.
listen to your instincts and just give it a go.
Yes, such wise words. I appreciate this, Carrie. Especially appreciate the kind of like just do it. Like all
Yeah.
the stories that you shared today started with one small step, one
Yes.
moment that actually did set the rest of your life on a different path
Yeah.
that gave you a different way of seeing the world or yourself and gave you courage to take that step forward. So,
That's
Carrie,
look, you're exactly right there. Because say if you're training to cycle the Tour de France, You don't go out on day one and cycle 120 miles and go up Mont Ventoux. You go out
Right.
and you maybe do a 30-minute ride and you build it up gradually over 6 to 12 months. And that's what you do. You just take that first small step.
Absolutely.
It's an Indian expression. A 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step.
Ceri, thank you so much for showing us what instinct looks like when you actually follow it. And thank you for sharing all your wisdom today. Your story is certainly a reminder that life does not expand when we play it safe. It expands when we choose what is true. If today's conversation sparked something in you, take a moment to sit with it. You can find more episodes and resources at flyingupstreampodcast.com. And if this show speaks to you, the best way to support it is to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who is ready to question the path they are on. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and always keep flying upstream.